I was a page in the Great Tribunal of the Galactic Council, 18 years old, low and unnoticed, the kind of person history does not record. And I am the only one left who can tell you what the old human actually said, and what he actually meant, because everyone else in that chamber heard the words and missed the meaning, and the missing of it nearly destroyed us all. They mocked him. A captured human, old and small and alone, brought before the mightiest body in the galaxy to be displayed and humiliated, and they laughed at him, and he let them laugh, and then he said the words that the whole galaxy now knows. You want war, we will give you war. And the council laughed harder because they thought they understood the threat. They did not understand it. I was close enough to see his face when he said it, close enough to see that it was not a threat at all. And I have spent my life trying to make people understand the difference, because the difference is everything, and we very nearly learned it too late. Let me tell you who I am, because a page sees things the great ones miss. We are furniture to them. We carry their water and their documents and stand against the walls, and because they do not see us, they do not perform for us, and so we see them as they actually are. My name is Tennu, and I was Heli, a small servile species, the council's traditional servants, bred over long centuries into the roles of attendants and pages and keepers of the chamber. We were not powerful. We were not respected. We were the hands that kept the Great Tribunal running, invisible and indispensable, and I had served in that chamber since I was a child, carrying documents and water and standing silent against the walls while the mightiest beings in the galaxy decided the fates of worlds. I had seen a great many proceedings. I had seen conquered leaders brought before the council, and petitioners begging for mercy, and the endless cold theater of galactic power. I thought I had seen everything. I had not seen anything like the old human, and what he showed me in that chamber changed the whole shape of my understanding of strength. Let me set the scene, because the scene matters, and because you must understand the council as it was before the old human in order to understand what he did to it. The Galactic Council in those days was at the height of its long dominance, an ancient body, a coalition of the great powers that had ruled the settled galaxy for so long that it had forgotten what it was to be challenged. And the thing you must understand, the thing that is the whole key to the story, is that the council had not fought a real war in a very long time. Generations. The great powers had divided the galaxy among themselves long ago, and they maintained their dominance through threat and ceremony and the occasional crushing of a minor world. But they had not faced a true war, a real and terrible and costly war in living memory. And so the council had come to think of war the way the very safe and very powerful always come to think of war, as a tool, a threat, a piece on a board, a thing that happened to other people far away, and that the council itself wielded but never suffered. War to the council was glory and dominance and the satisfying exercise of power. They had forgotten, or had never truly known, what war actually was. That forgetting is the heart of this story. The humans had come to the council's attention in the way minor species did. A young people, expanding from their cluster of worlds into a disputed frontier, and the council had decided, in its routine way, to put them in their place. There had been a border incident, the details of which do not matter, and in the course of it the council's forces had captured a human, not a soldier, not an official, just a human who had been in the wrong place, taken from a frontier settlement during a council show of force. And the council, in its arrogance, had decided to make use of him. To bring him before the Great Tribunal, to put him on display, to mock and interrogate and humiliate him before the assembled powers of the galaxy, as a way of demonstrating the council's contempt for the upstart human species and its dominance over them. It was theater. It was a performance of power, the kind the council loved. They would parade the captured human, break him, show the galaxy what became of those who defied the council, and send the humans a message through the broken body of one of their own. And the human they had captured was old. I remember the first sight of him brought into the Great Tribunal under guard, and I remember the ripple of contempt that went through the chamber, because he was so clearly not what a captive enemy was supposed to be. He was old, genuinely old by human reckoning, his hair white, his frame thin, his movements slow and careful in the way of the very aged. He was not a warrior. He was not impressive. He looked to the assembled might of the council, like exactly what they had hoped for, a frail, helpless, elderly creature, the perfect object for humiliation, a being so obviously weak that mocking him would be effortless and the demonstration of council dominance complete. They had wanted a human to break, and they had been given an old man who looked as though he might break if you spoke to him too harshly. The chamber was pleased. I felt the pleasure of it, the cruel anticipation, the assembled powers settling in to enjoy the spectacle of an old enemy's humiliation. I want to tell you about his eyes, though, because I was a page and pages stand close, and I saw his eyes when the great ones did not bother to, and his eyes were the first sign that the council had made a terrible mistake. He was frightened. I will not pretend he was not. He was an old man, alone, surrounded by hostile alien power, and there was fear in him, the honest fear of anyone in such a place. But underneath the fear there was something else, something I had never seen in any captive brought before that chamber, and it took me a long time to find the word for it. It was not defiance, exactly. It was not courage in the way warriors have courage. It was a kind of terrible patience, the patience of someone who has seen things so much worse than this room that the room could not truly frighten him, the patience of someone who knew something the mockers did not know, and who was sad underneath his fear, sad rather than afraid, because he could see where this was going and they could not. I did not understand it then. I understood it later. It was the look of a man who had been to war, real war, and who was looking at a room full of beings who had not, and who were about to demand one, and who had no idea what they were asking for. The mockery began. The council's speaker, a great cold being of one of the ancient powers, addressed the old human with elaborate contempt, and the chamber laughed along, and I will not repeat all of it, because it shames me to remember, the assembled mighty of the galaxy taking turns to humiliate a frightened old man. They mocked his age, his frailty, his species' weakness. They described in detail what the council would do to the human worlds, the crushing that awaited his people for their presumption. They demanded he beg, that he grovel, that he plead for his people's mercy and acknowledge the council's dominance. They wanted to break him, to make the old man weep and submit, and broadcast it to the human worlds as a demonstration of their helplessness. It was cruel, and it was petty, and it was the kind of thing the very powerful do when they have been unchallenged for too long, and have forgotten that strength is supposed to mean something more than the ability to humiliate the weak. And the old human bore it. That was the first thing that began to unsettle the chamber, though no one would have admitted it. He did not weep. He did not grovel. He did not beg. He stood slowly with the careful dignity of the very old, and he bore the mockery, all of it, with that terrible sad patience, and he did not give them the breaking they wanted. And the longer he bore it without breaking, the more the chamber's laughter began to curdle, to take on an edge of frustration, because the spectacle was not working. The old man would not perform his humiliation, and a mockery that the victim will not collapse under begins, slowly, to humiliate the mockers instead. Finally, the speaker, frustrated, made the demand that would undo everything. He demanded that the old human acknowledge the futility of human resistance. He told the old man that the council would crush his people, that the humans were weak and the council was mighty, that any war between them could end only in human annihilation, and he demanded that the old man admit that the humans could not fight the council, that resistance was hopeless, that war would mean the end of humanity. Say it, the speaker demanded. Tell us your people understand they cannot win a war against the Galactic Council. Beg us not to make war upon you, old creature, and perhaps we will be merciful. And the old human was quiet for a long moment. And then he lifted his head, and he looked at the speaker, and at the assembled council, the mighty powers who had never known war, who thought war was a threat to wield and not a thing to suffer. And his sad, patient face changed, and what came into it was not defiance and not fear, but something heavier than both, something that silenced the part of the chamber close enough to see it. And he said, in a quiet, steady voice that carried through the whole great hall, "You keep saying that word, war. You've said it a dozen times since they dragged me in here, like it's a club you're hitting me with. You want war. You're threatening me with war. You're enjoying the word." He paused, and the chamber was very quiet now. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it, because I'm probably the last person who's ever going to bother to warn you. You don't know what that word means. You've never known. You've spent so long being the biggest thing in the room that you've forgotten war is something that happens to you, not just something you do to other people. So you sit up there and you say it like it's nothing, like it's a threat that costs you nothing to make." His voice did not rise, but something in it hardened, and it was terrible, the quietness of it. "You want war? Fine. You want to see what war actually is? We'll show you. You want war? We will give you war, but not the war you think you're asking for. Not glory, not dominance, not a quick crushing of the weak. I mean the real thing. The thing my people spent 10,000 years learning to dread. You want war, and so help me, we will give you war, and you will finally understand the word, and you will spend the rest of your lives wishing you had never made an old man say it." The chamber laughed. Of course it laughed. The assembled mighty heard an old man threatening the Galactic Council, a frail captive promising war, and it was absurd. It was the empty defiance of the doomed, and they laughed. But I was close, and I was watching his face, and I did not laugh because I saw the thing they could not see, that he was not threatening them. He was warning them. He was grieving already for what he could see coming, and his "we will give you war" was not the boast of a conqueror, but the warning of a man who knew exactly what war was, and could see that these laughing powers were about to learn it the hardest way there is. Let me tell you what the old human meant, and what happened when the council that had never known war finally got the war it kept demanding, and how the most dangerous human in the galaxy turned out to be not a warrior with a fleet, but an old man who remembered what the mighty had forgotten. After the laughter died down, the speaker did the thing that I have come to think of as the council's true mistake. Not the capturing of the old man, not the mockery, but what came next. The speaker, annoyed that the old human had not been broken, decided to break him a different way. He decided to make the old man explain himself, certain that the explanation would expose the threat as the empty bluster it appeared to be, certain that forcing the frail captive to elaborate his absurd promise of war would complete the humiliation. So the speaker leaned forward with the cruel patience of a powerful thing toying with a weak one and said, "Explain yourself, old creature. You promise us war. You, a frail captive alone, promise the Galactic Council a war we will regret. Tell us, then. Tell us what war your dying species imagines it can bring to the masters of the galaxy. Amuse us with it before you beg." And the old man told them. And the telling is the thing I have carried my whole life, because it was not what anyone expected, and because every word of it was true. He said, "You want me to describe the fleets, don't you? The weapons. You want me to boast about human ships and human armies so you can laugh at how small they are next to yours. And you're right, they are small. We're a young species. Our fleet is nothing next to the Council's. If you're imagining I'm about to threaten you with our military might, you can keep laughing because you'd be right too. We can't beat you in the way you're thinking. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." He paused, and the chamber waited, certain now that the humiliation was about to complete itself. The old man about to admit the futility he'd been told to admit. "But you've made a mistake," he went on, "and it's the same mistake every comfortable, powerful thing makes right before it learns better. You think war is about who has the bigger fleet. You think war is something you win. And that tells me something very important about you. It tells me you've never actually been in one. Not a real one. Not the kind that takes everything from you. Because nobody who's been in a real war thinks about it the way you're thinking about it right now." The speaker began to interrupt, But the old man kept talking, and there was something in his voice now that held the chamber, a weight that even the mighty could not quite laugh through. "Let me tell you what my people know about war that you don't," he said. "We know it because we did it to ourselves over and over for 10,000 years on one small planet before we ever reached the stars. You powers up there, you divided the galaxy among yourselves a long time ago, and you've kept it divided through threats, and you've crushed a few weak worlds to keep the rest afraid, and you call that knowing war. You don't know war. You know dominance. They're not the same thing. War, real war, is what happens when you push a people who can't beat you and won't surrender into a corner where the only thing left to do is make you bleed. It doesn't matter that you'd win. We know we'd lose in the end against the Council. That was never the question. The question you should be asking, the question no one's asked you and so long you've forgotten it exists, is what losing would cost you. Because here's the thing about a war against people who have nothing left to lose and no way to surrender with honor. They don't fight to win. They fight to make it not worth it. They fight to bleed you so badly, for so long, in so many places, that even your victory tastes like ash. We've done it before to each other on Earth, small peoples against great empires, and the small peoples lost and lost and lost, and bled their conquerors so white in the losing that the great empires fell apart from the cost of their own victories. That's what we are. That's what you'd be making war on. Not a fleet you can crush in an afternoon. A people who know, in their bones, how to lose a war so expensively that winning it destroys you. The chamber was not laughing now. I felt the change, the way you feel weather change, a pressure shift in the great hall, because the old man was not boasting and he was not bluffing, and the assembled powers, who knew dominance but not war, were hearing something they had no framework for, a kind of threat that was not about strength at all, and it unsettled them precisely because they could not measure it. They knew how to weigh fleets. They did not know how to weigh a people's willingness to bleed. "You think you want this," the old man said, quieter now. "You've been saying that word, war, like it's a prize, so let me tell you what you'd actually be buying. You'd win the battles, all of them probably, and then you'd discover that we don't stop when we lose battles. You'd take our worlds and find them empty, or worse than empty. You'd hold territory that costs you more to hold than it could ever give back. You'd send your sons and daughters out to fight a people who have decided that since they can't win, they'll make sure you never enjoy winning, and they'd come home. The ones who came home, changed in the way that war changes people. The way you up there have never been changed because you've never paid that price. You'd spend a generation and a fortune and the lives of your young to conquer a people who'd make absolutely sure that the conquering broke something in you that you could never fix. And at the end of it, you'd have a graveyard and a grievance that would last 1,000 years, and a galaxy full of other small peoples who watched what it cost you to crush us and learned that the Council can be bled. That's the war you keep asking for. That's what we will give you war means. Not that we'll beat you. That will teach you the only way you'll learn, what the word actually costs, and you'll pay that tuition in the only currency war takes, which is the things and the people you love, and you will never, ever get them back. The silence in the chamber was total. And the old man, having said it, seemed to sag a little, the brief terrible strength going out of him, leaving just the frightened old man again. And what he said next was the thing that broke my heart. The thing that told me, finally, what he truly was, and why he was the most dangerous and the most merciful being in that room. He said softly, almost to himself, but the chamber was so silent that everyone heard it. "I don't want this. God, I don't want this. I'm an old man. I was a teacher. I taught history. I taught children about the wars, all our stupid, terrible wars, so they'd understand what they cost and grow up wanting to never do it again. That's my whole life. 40 years of standing in front of children, trying to make them dread war enough to prevent it. And now I'm standing in front of you, the most powerful beings in the galaxy, doing the same thing I did for those children, trying to make you dread it enough to stop. Because I can see you don't dread it, you've never learned to dread it, and that makes you the most dangerous fools in creation. I'm not threatening you. I'm begging you. I've buried friends in wars. I've seen what it does. And I'm looking at a room full of powerful children who have never buried anyone in a war they suffered, who think it's a game. And I'm trying, with the last thing I have, to make you understand before you do something that can't be undone. You want war. I'll give you war. I'll give you the truth about it, the whole terrible truth, if you'll only listen. Because the truth about war is the only weapon that has ever actually prevented one. And I, the page, 18 years old, standing against the wall with my pitcher of water, began to weep silently, where no one could see, because I understood him now. And I understood that the council had captured not an enemy but a teacher, and that the teacher was offering them, in that hostile chamber, the most valuable thing anyone had ever offered the Galactic Council, and that they were too proud and too comfortable and too ignorant of war to recognize the gift. The speaker recovered himself and tried to reassert the mockery, tried to laugh the old man's terrible quiet truth back into absurdity. He declared that the human was using words because he had no fleets, that frightening speeches were the weapon of the weak, that the council did not fear an old man's history lessons, and he ordered the war he had been threatening all along, not because he had to, but because the old man had unsettled the chamber, and the speaker needed to reassert dominance, needed to prove that the council was not afraid of a frail captive's warning. He ordered the fleets to move against the human worlds. He would have his war, the war the old man had begged him not to want, and he ordered it in a fit of wounded pride, to silence the thing the old man had made the chamber feel. And the old man closed his eyes, and I saw the grief take him fully, the grief of a man who had tried to prevent a thing and failed, and he said, not to the speaker, not to the council, but quietly to himself, the saddest words I have ever heard. I tried. God help us all, I tried. Let me tell you what happened when the Galactic Council, in its wounded pride, finally got the war it had been demanding, and how the old teacher's terrible warning came true, not as a boast but as a prophecy, and what it cost the powers who had never learned to dread the word, until an old man they had mocked taught it to them in the only language they would finally hear. The war went exactly as the old man said it would, which is to say the council won every battle and lost the war, and the losing took years, and I watched it from the chamber, because they kept the old man, and where they kept the old man they kept me, his assigned attendant, the page who had wept against the wall. I should explain that part because it matters. After the speaker ordered the war, the council did not execute the old human. They meant to. It was the natural conclusion of the humiliation, the broken captive disposed of once his use was spent. But something stopped them, and I think the something was that the old man had unsettled them too deeply, had said a thing they could not quite laugh off, and some part of the council, not the proud speaker, but quieter voices among the powers, wanted to keep him, to study him, to understand the strange, terrible certainty with which he had described a war they were now committed to fighting. So they kept him, imprisoned but alive, and because a captive of his apparent importance required an attendant, and because I was a page who happened to be present and beneath notice, I was assigned to him, to bring him food and water, to tend his small needs, to keep the prisoner who had warned the galaxy. And so I came to know him, the old teacher in the years of the war, and he is the reason I am who I am, and the reason I can tell you this story not as a chronicle of battles, but as the thing it actually was, which was a long, slow lesson taught by a man who did not want to teach it. His name was Samuel. I will give you that because the histories never bothered to record it to them. He was the captured human, a footnote. But to me he was Samuel, and he was a person, and in the years I tended him he taught me, the way he had taught children for 40 years, the truth about the thing the council was learning the hard way. He was not bitter, which astonished me. He was grieving, always grieving, as the news of the war came in, but he was not bitter, not even toward the council that had mocked him and imprisoned him and was now fulfilling his prophecy. They're not evil, he told me once early on, when I asked how he could stand attend his own warnings coming true without hatred. They're just powerful and ignorant, which is the most dangerous combination there is, but it isn't evil. They've never suffered. That's all. You can't blame a creature for not knowing a thing it's never been taught. You can only try to teach it, and grieve when it won't learn until the lesson costs everything. That's most of teaching, honestly. Watching people learn the hard way things, you tried to give them the easy way. And the war taught the council the hard way, exactly as Samuel had promised. The council fleets fell upon the human worlds and they won. Of course they won. Samuel had never said they wouldn't. They smashed the human navy in the great battles. They took the human worlds one after another. They achieved, by every measure the council understood, total victory, again and again. And the news of these victories came back to the chamber, and the speaker was triumphant, and declared the old man's warning the empty bluster he had always claimed it was. "We are winning," the speaker proclaimed. "The human worlds fall. Where is the terrible war the old creature promised? We have only victories." But Samuel, hearing the news of each victory through me, did not look like a man whose bluff had been called. He looked like a man watching a prophecy come true, and getting sadder with each triumph, because he understood what the speaker did not. That the victories were the trap, that every human world the council took was a wound the council did not yet feel, and that the bill for all this winning had not yet come due. "They're winning the battles," he said to me quietly after news of another great council victory. "Now watch what winning costs them. Watch the worlds they take turn to ash in their hands. Watch the price come due. It always comes due." That's the thing about war that the powerful never believe until it's too late. The bill always comes due, and it's always so much more than you thought you were spending. And the bill came due, slowly over the years, exactly as Samuel had foretold. The human worlds the council conquered did not become prizes, they became wounds. The humans, unable to win, did precisely what Samuel had said they would do. They fought not to win, but to make the winning worthless. They did not surrender when their navies were smashed. They kept fighting, in 1,000 small, terrible ways, on every conquered world, refusing to be governed, refusing to be pacified, making every occupied human world a constant bleeding drain on council resources and council lives. The council had to garrison what it conquered, and the garrisons bled, year after year, against a people who had decided that since they could not win, they would make absolutely certain the council never enjoyed its victory. The conquered worlds cost more to hold than they could ever give back, exactly as Samuel had said. The council's young went out to fight and came home changed, or did not come home, and the changing and the not coming home began slowly, to do to the comfortable powers of the council the thing they had never experienced. It made them suffer. It made them grieve. It made them, at long last, begin to understand the word they had been wielding so carelessly. And the galaxy watched. That was the part the speaker had understood least, and that hurt the council most. Every other small people in the galaxy, every minor world that had lived in fear of the council's dominance, watched the human war, watched the mighty council pour its blood and treasure into a war against a young species that would not break, watched the conquered human worlds bleed the council white, watched the cost mount and mount, and they learned the lesson Samuel had said they would learn. That the council could be bled, that its dominance was not free, that a people willing to pay the price could make even the council's victory unbearable. And across the galaxy, the fear that had held the council's dominance in place for generations began, quietly, to crack, because the humans had shown 100 frightened worlds the thing the council most needed to keep hidden, the true and terrible cost of making war on a people with nothing left to lose. Samuel watched it all through me, and he grieved every bit of it, the human dead, his own people, the price they were paying to teach the lesson, and the council dead too, the young of the powers who had mocked him, dying to learn a thing he had begged them to learn for free. He grieved both sides. That was the thing about him that I have never forgotten, the thing that made him the wisest being I have ever known. In a war between his people and the people who had imprisoned him, he grieved the dead of both, because to Samuel they were all just people, all paying the same terrible tuition in the same terrible school. And the tragedy was not which side won, but that the lesson had to be taught at such a cost at all, when he had offered to teach it for nothing. "This is what I tried to stop," he said to me near the end, when the war had ground both sides down and the council was beginning, finally, to understand. All of it, every grave on every side. I stood in that chamber and I offered them the lesson for free, and they laughed, and now they're learning it the only other way it can be learned, which is the way that fills the graves. And the worst part, his voice broke, the old teacher, and I had never seen him weep until that moment. The worst part is that they'll learn it. They're learning it right now. In a few more years they'll understand war exactly the way I wanted them to understand it. They'll dread it the way I spent 40 years teaching children to dread it. And the only difference between my way and this way is the cost. The lesson's the same. The graves are the difference. All those graves, just to learn the thing I offered them in an afternoon. And I understood then the full weight of what the title of this story gets wrong, the thing the whole galaxy got wrong about that day in the chamber. The council mocked a captured elderly human, and he said, "You want war? We will give you war." And everyone remembers it as a threat, the defiant boast of a doomed old man, vindicated when the war came. But it was never a threat. It was a teacher's last desperate attempt to prevent the very thing he was accused of threatening. "We will give you war" did not mean "we will destroy you." It meant "we will make you understand war, since you refuse to learn it any other way." And the tragedy, the thing Samuel grieved with his whole heart, was that he was right, that the council did learn, that the war taught them exactly the dread he had tried to teach them for free, and that the teaching cost a generation of graves on both sides that an afternoon of listening could have prevented. Let me tell you how the war ended, and what Samuel did at the very end, and what the council, humbled now, and grieving, and finally, terribly, educated, did with the old teacher they had mocked, when they understood at last that he had been the only friend they had in that chamber, the only one who had tried to save them from themselves. Because the end of this story is not the war. The war was only the lesson. The end of the story is what comes after a hard lesson, when the ones who learned it the hard way finally turn back to the teacher they had mocked, and see him at last for what he was. The war ended the way Samuel had always known it would, which was not with a surrender but with an exhaustion. The council finally understanding, after years and graves, that it could not win in any way that was worth the winning, and the humans finally unable to bleed any further, and both sides arriving, broken, at the place Samuel had tried to bring them without the bleeding, the understanding that the war had to stop. And when the council, humbled past the possibility of pride, at last sought a way to end it, it did the thing that no one in that chamber years before could have imagined. It came back to the old man it had mocked, and it asked him how. I was there for that too. I had been with Samuel through the whole of it, and I was with him when the speaker, the same speaker, older now and changed, the cold pride burned out of him by years of a war he had ordered and come to understand, came to Samuel's cell. I had never seen the speaker come to the prisoner before. It was always the prisoner brought to the chamber, the captive paraded before power. But now power came to the captive, quietly, without ceremony, an old defeated being coming to an old grieving one, and the speaker stood before Samuel and did the hardest thing a proud creature can do. He admitted he had been wrong. "You warned us," the speaker said. He did not say it grandly. He said it the way you say a thing you have been carrying for years and can no longer hold. "In the chamber, you told us we did not understand war, and we laughed at you, and I ordered the war to silence you out of pride because you had made me feel something I did not want to feel in front of the council. And everything you said has come to pass. Every word. The empty worlds, the graves. The cost that was so much more than we imagined. The watching galaxy. My own people, my own young, dead to learn a thing you offered us for nothing." He was quiet a moment. "I have come to ask you to teach us how to stop. You said in the chamber that the truth about war is the only weapon that ever prevented one. I did not understand you then. I understand you now. So I am asking, old teacher, the thing I should have asked you that first day instead of mocking you, teach us. Teach us how to end this and how to never do it again. Please. And Samuel, old and tired and grieving, the teacher who had been mocked and imprisoned and proven right at the cost of more graves than either of us could count, did not gloat. I watched him, and there was no triumph in him, none, only a terrible, weary compassion, the compassion of a teacher for a student who has finally, at great cost, learned the lesson. He said, "Sit down. You don't have to stand. We're just two old men now, and we both know too much about graves." And the speaker sat, the mighty speaker of the Galactic Council, sat on the floor of a prisoner's cell across from the old man he had mocked, and Samuel taught him, the way he had taught children for 40 years, the way he had tried to teach the whole chamber in a single afternoon, the truth about war, the whole terrible truth, and how to carry the dread of it in a way that prevents instead of destroys. I cannot give you all of what he taught over the days that followed, because much of it was beyond me, a page, and much of it was simply Samuel and the speaker talking, two old men working out how to end a war and build a peace that would hold. But I can give you the heart of it, because Samuel said it to me afterward, in plain words, and it is the thing I have carried and taught in my own turn for the rest of my life. Peace isn't the absence of war, Samuel said. That's what they always get wrong, the powerful, the ones who have never suffered. They think if they're strong enough, if they dominate hard enough, they'll have peace. But that's not peace. That's just war held down by force, war waiting. Real peace comes from one thing only, and it's the thing I tried to give them in that chamber, and they had to learn the hard way. It comes from everyone involved truly understanding what war costs, dreading it together and choosing, every day deliberately, not to pay that cost when there's any other way. Peace isn't strength. Peace is shared dread, turned into shared care. The council can have peace now, real peace, not because they've won, but because they finally know what war costs, and a people who truly know that will move heaven and earth to avoid it. That's the only peace there is. It's expensive to learn and cheap to keep, and I spent my whole life trying to help people learn it the cheap way, and mostly failing, because the cheap way requires listening to an old teacher, and the powerful would rather pay in graves than admit an old teacher might be right. The war ended. The council and the humans made a peace, a real one, built on the terrible shared knowledge the war had given both sides, a peace negotiated in part by Samuel himself, who the council now treated not as a prisoner but as something closer to a revered elder, an advisor, the teacher who had tried to save them from themselves and who now helped them build the thing he had wanted all along. The human worlds were freed. The council, humbled and educated, did not return to its old careless dominance. The war had broken something in its comfortable certainty that could not be rebuilt, and in the breaking, something better grew, a council that had finally learned to dread war, and that therefore, for the first time in generations, could be trusted not to wield it carelessly. The galaxy changed. The fear that had held the council's dominance gave way slowly to something more like a genuine balance, because the powers had learned, at last, the lesson Samuel had offered, that you cannot dominate a galaxy forever through a threat you do not understand, and that the only stable peace is the one built by people who have all together learned to dread the alternative. Samuel did not live very long after the war. He was old, and the years of imprisonment and grief had worn him down, and I think, too, that he had spent himself completely on the great last lesson of his life, and had little left once it was taught. But he did not die a prisoner, and he did not die mocked. He died honored, an old teacher in a quiet room, with the page who had loved him at his side, and with the strange knowledge that he had done at the end of his life, the thing he had spent his whole life trying to do. He had taught the most powerful and dangerous students in the galaxy to dread war, and in the dreading to choose peace. The last thing he said to me near the end was the thing I have built my life around, and I will give it to you as he gave it to me. He said, "Tenu, You were the only one in that chamber who heard me that first day. I saw you against the wall, I saw you understand. So I'm going to ask you to do the thing I did for as long as you can because it's the only thing that's ever actually mattered. He was very tired. Teach them, whoever you can, however you can. Teach them what war costs so they dread it, so they choose against it. It almost never works. They almost always have to learn the hard way, the way the council did in Graves. But sometimes it works. Sometimes one person listens. Sometimes you give someone the lesson for free and they take it, and somewhere down the line a war doesn't happen because of it. A war you'll never know about, that simply never occurs because someone once was taught to dread it in time. You'll never see those wars. That's the hardest part of the work. You only ever see the ones you failed to stop. But the ones you stop are real even though they're invisible. Believe that. It's the only thing that makes the teaching bearable. Now, and he smiled, the old teacher at the end, go and teach. That's all there ever was. That's the whole of it. Go and teach them to dread the thing they think they want so they never have to learn it the way we did. And he died, and I have spent the rest of my life doing what he asked. The Galactic Council mocked a captured elderly human until he said, "You want war, we will give you war." That is how the story is told, and it is true, and it is understood by almost everyone exactly backwards. They think it is a story about a defiant old man who threatened the council and was proven right when his people's terrible war broke the mighty. It is not that story. It was never that story. It is the story of a teacher, an old history teacher who had spent 40 years trying to make the young dread war enough to prevent it, who was dragged before the most powerful and most dangerous students in the galaxy, students who had never learned the lesson, and who offered them in his last and hardest classroom the thing he had given children his whole life, the truth about war, the whole terrible cost of it, in the desperate hope that they would dread it enough to choose peace. "We will give you war" was never a threat. It was the promise of a teacher who knew that if his students would not learn the lesson the easy way, from his words, they would learn it the only other way it can be learned, in graves, in grief, in the terrible classroom of the thing itself. He gave them war, and the war taught them exactly what he had tried to teach them for free. And then, when they had learned it, when they came to him broken and humbled and finally ready, he did the last thing a great teacher does. He taught them how to make sure they never needed the lesson again. The most dangerous human in the galaxy was not a warrior. He was a teacher. And the most powerful weapon any of us has ever possessed is not a fleet, and not a bomb, and not the ability to make war. It is the ability to teach people to dread it, truly, deeply in their bones, so that they choose freely and forever not to make it at all. I was a page against the wall, 18 years old, and an old man I tended in his prison taught me that. I have taught it to everyone I could for the whole of my long life since. And somewhere out there, I have to believe, are the wars that never happened because of it, invisible, unrecorded, the only victories that ever truly mattered. That was Samuel's war, the one he won by losing, the one that fills no graves. The only kind worth giving anyone.